Hello, and welcome back to Crime on the Clarkfork, the true crime podcast where I tell you about big crimes that happen in small places, with each case having occurred in areas with populations of 15,000 or less. My name is Mackenzie Spence, and I'm your host. I first just want to start off by apologizing that it has been a month since the last episode. Life has been insane. My boyfriend and I have been moving, so first off, losing stuff in the move and having to re-find everything, but also just the stress of moving was a lot, so I didn't have a lot of time to write or record or anything like that. And on top of that, last weekend we went to Boise for a Tom Segura show, so I also didn't have time last weekend to put something out either. So I apologize for that. I know it's been a while, but just a little background on kind of what it looks like for me to do this podcast. It takes me anywhere from 4 to 7 hours to research each case, and then also at least an hour to record, and then generally an hour and a half to edit down to what I release. So I edit out some of my breath intakes, Kenai makes noises, I get interrupted, I misspeak and have to go back and restart a sentence, so I make you guys not have to listen to that. So honestly, it probably takes me anywhere from 7 to 11 or 12 hours to do an episode end to end. So again, I am so sorry that it has been so long since releasing my last episode, but I hope y'all can forgive me. And I have a great case today. And then also, I realized that I don't think that I explained the name of my podcast. So I wanted to talk about that today before we get started. It took me a really long time to decide on a name. I kind of jumped around. One of the ideas was Murder in the Mountains and other rural-esque names to drive home the small place theme. But I landed on Crime on the Clarkfork for a couple of reasons. So the first is that I'm from a town in western Montana that sits on the Clarkfork River. And second, that there are multiple small towns in western Montana that also sit on the Clarkfork River, and most of them with populations far, far less than 15,000. And finally, I love true crime. So when I listen to other podcasts, I have sent in case suggestions that have happened in places that are close to home or similar to home, but they literally never get picked. So I know it's probably due to an abundance of reasons, but I really wanted these stories to be heard, even if there wasn't as much media attention on them, and thus Crime on the Clarkfork was born. So there's a little background on where I've been, where the name came from, but with that being said, I am glad you're here, and let's just get going into this case. So this episode, we are heading back to the United States, to South Carolina, and for me, disappearance cases scare me the most when I'm listening and reading about true crime. So this week I decided to cover one of those cases and scare myself. So the sources for this week's episode are World Population Review, ABC News 4, Unresolved, The Charlie Project, International Missing Persons Wiki, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and Fox 28 Savannah. This week, the disappearance of Annette Sagers and Korrina Malinoski. Let's get into it. Mount Holly, South Carolina, 1988. Population 7,700. It was the morning of October 4th, 1988, when Annette Sagers walked to her bus stop on the way to school for the day in her red pants, a red shirt, and white shoes. She was around 4'8" with brown hair, brown eyes, pierced ears, a small gap between her two front teeth, and spoke with a slight speech impediment. Her bus stop was not far from her home, and she made the trip to the bus stop every school day with her dog around 7 a.m. On October 4th, Annette was seen waiting for her school bus around 7 a.m. at the bus stop by a bus driver heading the opposite direction on the other side of the train tracks. It was determined that the child waiting for the bus was Annette because no other children were picked up from this stop. Around 7:20 a.m., the bus driver arrived to pick up Annette for school. but Annette was no longer at the stop. Assuming that she was not going to school that day, maybe she had gotten sick or something happened at home, the driver just continued on their route. The road that the bus stop was situated on didn't really receive a ton of traffic at this time, but there were still people traveling to work on the road in the mornings, and the road was definitely not abandoned. With that being said, no vehicles that passed the bus stop that morning saw anyone pick Annette up or saw her walk away from the stop. It was as if she disappeared into thin air. Her dog was also missing. Annette wasn't reported missing until around 4:15 p.m. that evening. She was reported missing by her stepfather, Stephen, who didn't even realize that she was actually missing until around 4 p.m. that afternoon, as that is when he found out that she had never made it to school that morning, and then she didn't arrive back home after the bus would have dropped her off. He then went to the bus stop that Annette had traveled to that morning to wait for the bus, and he found a crumpled piece of notebook paper that was left in a small wooden hut that Stephen had made the girl to protect her from bad weather while waiting for the bus. When he uncrumpled the paper, there was writing on it, apparently from Annette, that read, "Dad, Mom came back. Give the boys lots of kisses and hugs, and also you too. Love, Annette." The note itself also had words that were crossed out and added as if the note was written quickly by Annette, like she didn't have enough time to start a new note on a fresh sheet of paper. So now is probably a good time to mention that Annette's mother, Korrina, had vanished without a trace 11 months prior to Annette's disappearance. Korrina was 16 years old when she became pregnant with Annette in 1978. She also always kept the identity of Annette's birth father secret from friends and family for one reason or another. Once Korrina gave birth to Annette, she worked incredibly hard to ensure that the little girl had a good upbringing while being raised by a single mother. Leon and Sandy, Korrina's brother and sister-in-law, also helped to raise the little girl in any way they could. When Korrina turned 20 years old, she met Stephen Malinoski, a 32-year-old Army veteran and worker of odd jobs around the country. Stephen was working as a carny at a local carnival when they met, and the two began to date not long after their meeting. After only 6 months of knowing each other, the two got married on October 16, 1981. Korrina was Stephen's third marriage. Not long after the two married, Stephen managed to get a job as a caretaker on the Mount Holly plantation in Berkeley County, South Carolina. The three, Korrina, Stephen, and Annette, all moved to the plantation in 1982, just 30 miles outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Their home was settled around half a mile behind the gate to the plantation, surrounded by cypress trees and Spanish moss that is draped along the tree branches. The couple had no neighbors near their new home other than some bears and alligators that had inhabited the hundreds of acres of swampland. Once they were settled in their new home, Korrina was able to get a job at a convenience store in Summerville, South Carolina, not far from their home on the plantation. Within the following 2 years, Stephen and Korrina had two boys. Their first, Thomas, was born in 1982, and James, their second child, was born in 1984. With all of this being said, the marriage of Korrina and Stephen was not all butterflies and rainbows. The couple often fought, and Leon, Korrina's brother, claims that Stephen was abusive to Korrina, and he would often urge her to leave the marriage, letting Korrina know that he and his wife would help her out in any way if they could, if she did decide to leave. The couple often fought about Stephen's drinking and drug problem, because Stephen was a habitual cocaine user, and this caused the couple to run into money problems as well. Korrina's sister-in-law, Sandy, stated that Korrina would call several times every single month to talk about the arguments and fights that she had been in with Stephen. Korrina never left Stephen because of the kids, but that meant she wouldn't back down either. Sandy also stated that she fought right back. She wouldn't take anything. She even hit him over the head with a skillet before. It was November 21st, 1987, when Korrina mysteriously disappeared without a trace. According to Stephen, the two had a huge argument about Stephen's drinking, and Korrina left the plantation in her car to go for a drive to blow off some steam. She had left their home around 11 or 11:30 p.m. and drove towards Highway 52, and she did not return that night. The following day, Korrina didn't show up for her job at the Oasis convenience store, which was not like her at all. She was known to be a great worker and always showed up to her shifts even with the stress of caring for 2 toddlers and the 10-year-old Annette. When her boss, Bruce Clarkson, noticed that she didn't arrive at work, he became worried and began looking for her, thinking that there was a chance her vehicle may have broken down on the way to work or she had gotten in a car accident. So Clarkson got in his vehicle and drove towards Korrina's home, assuming that if she did break down or something happened, she would be on the road she took to work every day from her home. Clarkson drove all the way to Korrina's home at the plantation and saw that her car was parked with the doors locked, sitting inside the locked entrance to the plantation. When he got out of his car, he went to look in Korrina's car in case she was in there, but she wasn't. He did note that there was also a layer of dew on her car, as if it had been sitting out there for some time, not being driven that morning. When Clarkson noticed that Korrina wasn't inside the vehicle, he walked up the half-mile driveway to the house that Korrina shared with her family, and he knocked. Stephen answered the door, and Clarkson asked where Korrina was. Stephen said that he didn't know, and that he had a fight the night before, and that she had left in her car. Clarkson then told Stephen that Korrina's car was parked up front, inside the gate, and locked. When Clarkson said this, Stephen said that he would call the cops. He then called the police to report Korrina missing, as well as reached out to Korrina's brother Leon to tell him that his sister was missing. Police arrived at the plantation and began searching for 26-year-old Korrina, but found nothing. There was no sign of a struggle that pointed to foul play, and they also weren't able to find any belongings of Korrina around the area either. It was as if she just up and disappeared. Those who were friends or acquaintances of Korrina knew that there was no way that she would willingly leave her 3 young children without a word to anyone, which made many believe that she had been met with foul play and taken against her will. Sandy has also gone on record to say that if Korrina was alive, she would have at least called to let her loved ones know that she was okay and not to worry. Stephen had told police that when she left the house the previous night, he watched her get in her car and leave, but didn't see what she did after that. But Stephen told Leon, Korrina's brother, that when she left, he was on the front porch and saw her park her car at the gate and get into another car that was on Highway 53. The problem with the claim that he made to Leon is that the highway cannot be seen from the house that Korrina and Stephen were living in. As I said before, the driveway was half a mile long, and the road from the gate to the home was curvy and wooded, so there was no way that Stephen would have been able to see Korrina park her car at the gate, let alone get into another car on the other side of said locked gate. Assuming that Stephen may have had something to do with her disappearance, especially after the supposed large fight they had that evening, the police asked Stephen to complete a polygraph test, but the results came back inconclusive. The investigators had also spoken with Annette to ask if she saw anything that may have happened to her mother. They thought to ask because the way the house was laid out, if something had happened to Korrina in the house with Annette there, she would have seen something. Unfortunately, Annette told investigators that she hadn't seen anything. A couple of days after Korrina went missing, Korrina's half-sister Cheryl and father came to the plantation. But Stephen wouldn't let them be alone with Annette, which they found really bizarre. At one point, Annette wanted to bring Cheryl to the attic to show her something, but Stephen wouldn't let them go up there. Cheryl doesn't know if there was anything up there, but detectives searched the attic later in the investigation and found nothing. Also, when asked about the attic to Stephen, he said that he had never even been up there, so he didn't know why Annette was so gung-ho to bring Cheryl up there when she was visiting. So, with nothing to go off of, Korrina's case went cold. That is, until her daughter, Annette, went missing 11 months later. After Stephen reported Annette missing, the police searched the plantation for any signs of Annette, both on foot and from the air. They had assistance from multiple agencies, including the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office, SLED, and the Wildlife Department, who all helped with the massive search of the marshland, but to no avail. Annette, similarly to her mother, had disappeared into thin air. The investigators also placed flags on Annette and Korrina's social security numbers and school records in case something popped up in another part of the country. During the investigation into Annette's disappearance, they found out that a few months prior, she had gone up to another caretaker on the plantation asking for food for her and her brothers because she stated that they hadn't eaten for 3 days. The caretaker decided to go take a look at the cabin that Stephen and the 3 kids were sharing and decided to call Child Protection Services. Something else that investigators found odd was that after Korrina's disappearance, Cheryl and Sandy stayed close with Stephen so they could check on the 3 kids. They also found out that after 1 year of Korrina's disappearance, they would be able to get legal custody of Annette since she wasn't Stephen's biological child, nor had he adopted her. Just before the year was up, Sandy had actually convinced Stephen to let Annette go down to her and Leon's house for a month in the summer, and Stephen was all for it at the time. But then, just before she was supposed to go, he changed his mind and refused to let Annette go to her aunt and uncle's house. They also found out that another time within that year, since Korrina had been missing, Cheryl was actually going to have surgery, and thus had time off from work. So she had talked to Stephen about staying at the house on the plantation to spend time with Annette and the 2 boys while she had time off. Stephen was also excited about this and even started calling Cheryl all the time to talk about what they could do together when she got to the plantation. But then, 1 week before Cheryl was supposed to arrive to spend time with the kids and Stephen, Annette vanished and Stephen never called or spoke to Cheryl again. He didn't even call to let her know that Annette had gone missing. After the investigation ensued, Cheryl told of this experience to the police, who then told her to never go to the house by herself, as they were worried about what could possibly happen to her. As we know, investigations have become much more sophisticated with the use of new technology and techniques to solve crime. Unfortunately, in 1987, that was not the case. When asked about the case, an investigator said that, and I quote, "It was very frustrating. You have a missing persons report, and that's it until something else comes forward," end quote. With that being said, there were a couple of situations that have arisen over the years that made investigators hopeful that they may have a lead in the case. At one point, in the early 1990s, a pond on the plantation was drained for maintenance, and the caretaker at the time found a rug that was tied up with electrical cord. And this pond was not far from the home and easily accessed by someone who happened to be a caretaker for the grounds. The caretaker called the police when he found the rug, and the police came out, opened up the rug, and there was nothing. It had been in the water for some time and was completely black, and it was quickly thrown out. Also, it was never put into evidence for Annette or Korrina's missing person cases. The only reason that this evidence was even thought about in this case was because way later, when investigators were starting to question people again, the caretaker came forward and talked about the rug. But at that point, it had been so long since the rug had been thrown out, there was no chance of finding it. And the unfortunate part is, if the rug would have been kept as evidence, they probably would have been able to do some form of DNA testing on the rug to see if Annette or Korrina's DNA was within it. Investigators now believe that this rug could have been something that was a smoking gun if it had been found when either Korrina or Annette went missing, but there had also been a lot of personnel changes in the sheriff's office at the time, which made some areas on the plantation less investigated than they should have been. On top of that, the fact that the rug was thrown away, again, made it so it couldn't be tested once forensic testing became better over the last 30 years. After the rug was found in the pond, it was 10 more years before another clue came into the case. In 2000, an anonymous letter was sent to the local police department in charge of the cold case. The letter said that Korrina and Annette's bodies were buried in Sumter County, South Carolina. The letter was accompanied by an incredibly detailed map of the area where the bodies were claimed to be buried. Police immediately went and searched the area that was detailed on the map with a cadaver dog, but came up empty. Annette and Korrina's bodies were not there. The letter was then sent to a forensics lab to see if they would be able to pull any fingerprints or DNA to identify the author, but nothing was able to be concluded. Finally, in 2016, one of Stephen's friends came forward to police to tell them about a conversation that he had had with Stephen prior to either of the girls going missing. This conversation stuck with him for nearly 30 years. The two had been riding horses on the back roads of the Mount Holly plantation, and they had come upon a large hill that had a dirt piled high near the pond. They stopped the horses, and Stephen said that this location would be a great place to bury a body. When the police heard this from Stephen's friend, they immediately got cadaver dogs and headed to the area. With cadaver dogs, the older the case is, the harder it is for dogs to find a scent, because wind and water move the scent as time goes on. In this case, with the area being near the pond, there's a chance that the dogs could pick up a scent that is bound to underground water that is also moved through the soil profile and could be picked up by the dogs 500 yards away from where it originated. Also, because the area is so wet, there's a chance that the evidence and scent can degrade a lot faster than it would in a dry climate. Due to this, investigators worked with hydrologists to develop a mathematical equation that would help narrow down the search area. Once the search area was narrowed down, the dogs were brought to the area that Stephen's friend had mentioned in his statement to the police. Dogs alerted to the scent of human decomposition when they began searching the area on the Mount Holly plantation, and investigators dug around 20 holes over the course of 1.5 years. The holes were dug in a way that allowed them to work upstream in order to find the source of the scent the dogs had alerted to. Unfortunately, they still haven't found anything. With that being said, investigators believe that they are close and that the mother-daughter pair never truly left the plantation, and if they find one, they think they'll find the other. On top of Stephen being a suspect, there are a couple of other theories that have been brought up on the case. The first is that Annette and Korrina both ran into bad luck and were abducted and or murdered by two different people at the same location just 11 months apart. The only thing that makes this seem implausible, aside from extremely bad luck, is the fact that the note that was left in the shack was in Annette's handwriting, and that there was no sign of a struggle at the bus stop where Annette was last seen. Another theory is that there was a serial killer in the area that had taken and murdered both Annette and Korrina. In the area of the Mount Holly plantation, there had been other disappearances in 1987, specifically of 3 people: Linda McCord, Sarah Boyd, and Sarah's daughter, Kimberly Boyd. The 3 had gone missing as they were returning home from a gospel concert, just 20 miles from the plantation. The area of the plantation and the other disappearances is a heavily wooded and rural, so there are ample places to hide a body if need be. With that being said, investigators generally shy away from this theory based on the odd circumstances of Annette and Korrina's disappearances happening nearly 1 year apart, and also the fact that Annette went missing in broad daylight in a very short window of time, just 20 minutes. The third theory is that Korrina did run away from her abusive husband and came back to retrieve Annette, just as the note said. The issues that I and others have with this theory is that, according to her friends and family, Korrina would not just leave all 3 of her young kids, with Stephen, without checking in or letting someone know where she is and that she's okay. She had endured so much abuse from Stephen and never once left her children to get away from it. On top of that fact, if Korrina did run away on her own volition, why would she leave her car at the gate? It would be so much easier to get away from the plantation if she had taken her own car. There is a chance that Korrina would be afraid that Stephen would have been able to track her through the use of her car and license plates, but that would also mean that she would have had to flee on foot or via public transport or have an accomplice. But since no one has claimed to see Korrina after her disappearance, even with the large search, many, including myself, feel that this theory is unlikely, especially because if they are alive, Korrina and Annette have never come forward in the past 37 years, even though her brother, sister-in-law, sister, her two young children who she had left behind, and other friends and family members have continued to search for them to this day. Similarly, Korrina also had family in Iowa and Illinois, which is far away from South Carolina, so that would have been the most plausible place for Annette and Korrina to go after fleeing, yet they never arrived there. On top of that, many of Korrina's friends and family have also said that they found it to be highly unlikely for Korrina to only come back for one child and not the other two. If this theory of Korrina running away and then returning for Annette is the case, I personally can see why Korrina wouldn't have grabbed the two young boys. For one, since Stephen wasn't Annette's biological or adoptive parent, it would have been easier to take Annette as she had sole custody, whereas the boys were custodially and biologically Stephen's. The boys were also both under 5 years old, so the chance that they would have been far away from Stephen or another adult was very unlikely, which would have made it a lot harder for Korrina to come back for them as well. Annette, on the other hand, was obviously old enough to be trusted to walk to the bus stop alone with her dog every day, which would have made it easy for Korrina to pick up Annette, especially if she was familiar with the bus schedule. The final theory that people have is probably the most likely, and that is that Stephen killed Annette and Korrina and disposed of their bodies in the swampland of the 6,000-acre plantation. When interviewed, Stephen never denied being abusive to Korrina. Stephen was also the last person to see Korrina alive, which would make it very easy for him to make up any story he wanted about Korrina's whereabouts and last known movements. It doesn't help that the stories that Stephen gave to the police and Leon were different. Remember, he told police that Korrina stormed out of the house and he didn't see her again, but he told Leon that he watched her drive to the gate, get out of her car, and get into someone else's vehicle. This theory can also explain the note by assuming that Stephen made Annette write the note, placed it in the wooden shack, and then killed her because he was afraid that she knew too much about her mom's disappearance and would tell Cheryl or Sandy and Leon when they got custody of her. To add to the suspicion on Stephen, when the note was found, he showed no surprise about his wife still being alive and, just out in the world. With that being said, people do react to trauma very differently, so you can't use the emotions of someone to determine if they're guilty or not. But another thing that others have found peculiar is the fact that the piece of binder paper that Annette wrote her note on was not disturbed throughout the day. Since Annette disappeared between 7 and 7:20 a.m., that means her note would have had to sit there for 8 to 10 hours before being found by Stephen when he realized that Annette was missing. Now, if you think of driving on a highway and there's a piece of paper on the side of the road, when you drive past it, that thing flies. The shack that he had built, Annette, was not too far off the road, so you would think that if she left a note in the shack and people were driving past it all day, or even one gust of wind hit it the wrong way, it wouldn't have been in the shack anymore. So, I see where people are with that. The final part of this fourth theory that kind of points people this direction is that after only 3 months of Annette disappearing, Stephen moved himself and the boys to Florida, which caused some eyebrows to raise regarding Stephen's involvement in the case. Because generally, when someone goes missing, family members tend to stay in that area in case the people come back. Also, not long after moving to Florida, Stephen left the two young boys with his new neighbors and did not return for them. Eventually, the neighbors got a hold of CPS, and the boys were placed in the foster care system. Not surprisingly, Stephen didn't let any of Korrina's family know that he was planning on giving up the boys, as they would have been more than happy to take them in, just like they were planning to do with Annette, right before her disappearance. What did come to light with Stephen abandoning the boys was that it wasn't the first time he abandoned his children. Prior to his marriage with Korrina, which, just a reminder, his marriage with Korrina was his third, he was married to another woman, got her pregnant, and then disappeared before the child was born. When his family asked him what happened to his pregnant wife, he told them that she and their unborn child had died in a house fire, which obviously was a huge lie. Luckily, the two boys were adopted out of the foster care system and lived happy lives after a quite unpredictable early start. The boys actually didn't even know that Korrina or Annette went missing up until they were older. The boys believed that their mother had simply left them and their father, not that she had mysteriously disappeared, possibly by the hands of their absent father. When it comes to their memories of Annette, they don't remember much. Remember, the boys were under 5 years old. They mostly remember a girl that they used to play with at a young age, but didn't seem to put the connection together that it was their sister. Now, today, the two boys are actively searching for their mother and sister, and also have been very involved in the missing persons cases. Today, Stephen lives in Florida. He got out of jail a few years ago after he pled guilty to domestic-related child abuse charges and a charge for tampering with a witness, and neither of those are related to this case, but he has been in jail. Investigators spoke with him while he was in jail, and he still stands firm that he has nothing to do with the disappearances of Korrina and Annette. Leon, Korrina's brother, died of a heart attack in 2022, and his wife, Sandy, believes that the stress and heartache from losing his sister and niece are to blame. While this case is still cold, the investigators want the public to know that they have not given up finding Annette and Korrina. They are simply trying to find the right piece of the puzzle to allow everything to fall into place. Today, Annette would be 47 years old and Korrina would be 62. Both had a lot of life ahead of them. I personally hope that Korrina did truly run away and went back for Annette, and that they are both out there living their lives happily away from the abuse that Stephen gave out. But unfortunately, I personally don't think they're still alive. Based on all the research that I did for this podcast case, and the fact that many of the investigators also believe that they met foul play, that's kind of the way that I'm leaning. So, as I said in the beginning of this episode, missing persons cases scare me the most because there's such a lack of closure and information on what truly did happen. I hope you liked this episode, and as always, please give me 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a review on Apple Podcasts. Again, as always, I am always looking for cases to cover, so if you have a case suggestion, please visit the link in the show's Instagram page at Crime on the Clarkfork. I also post pictures from the cases that I cover on that Instagram page, so go give that a quick follow and let me know what you think happened to Annette and Korrina in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will catch you next time with more big crime in small places.